makers and market movers. This is The Pulse with Francine Lacqua.
Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to The Pulse. I'm Francine Lacqua here in London. Now, in a moment, we'll discuss the markets with Seema Shah, Chief Global Strategist at Principal Asset Management. Before that, we'll, of course, get a status update on the U.S. shutdown with our Stephanie Baker. We'll also talk Boeing and Tesla with our transport reporter, Danny Lee. But first, President Donald Trump is weighing slashing thousands of federal jobs as the White House looks to ratchet up pressure on Democrats to end a government shutdown. So for more on this, we're joined by Stephanie Baker, our senior writer. Stephanie, good morning. So first of all, would the layoffs actually be legal, or is this an empty threat?
Well, the layoffs would certainly be unprecedented, and many are arguing that they would be illegal. It would take a while to litigate that, potentially going all the way to the Supreme Court. But the threat is very real, and this shows the real risk of the Democrats blocking the continuing resolution and shutting the government down, that it hands Trump huge leeway to enact his agenda. And remember, Russell Vought, the OMB, the Office of Management and Budget leader, he worked for Heritage Foundation's Project 2025. So they're going to use this to try to push their agenda as far as they can, not only with layoffs, but potentially cutting funding to Democratic states.
Stephanie, who's blaming who? So is are the citizens blaming the Democrats or the Republicans, or a bit of both?
I think it's early days, but there was a Washington Post poll that came out yesterday that said the majority of voters blame Trump and the Republicans. Now, that could shift as the shutdown drags out. But for the moment, the Democrats are winning the messaging wars, saying that they are fighting for American citizens' health care. The heart of this debate is the Democrats want to extend these extra subsidies for Obamacare. And without that, they're saying your premiums, your health care costs will double. And so far, they're winning that message. But, it's early days.
Stephanie, thanks so much. Stephanie Baker there with the very latest on the shutdown. Bloomberg has also learned that Boeing, it's a mouthful, especially for a Friday. Bloomberg has learned Boeing's new aircraft is facing a significant delay and is now expected to enter commercial service in 2027 instead of next year. So what's holding up the 777X? It's already 6 years late. And how damaging are the delays for Boeing and its customers? This man will answer everything, of course, on this. Danny, thank you for joining us. Look, what exactly is happening with Boeing? And am I saying it correctly? It's the 777X, not 10, right?
Yeah, 777X. It's the newest wide-body jet that Boeing is producing. And I think Kelly Ottberg, the Boeing CEO, kind of alluded last month to certification issues, a mountain of work that Boeing has got to get through in order to then get the ramp-up of production started and then handing over the new jets to customers. And so, therefore, we are going to see this timeline shifting according to our Bloomberg sources. So it's going to be from, instead of 2026, it's going to be 2027. Ultimately, even if there's a shift of maybe a couple of months or several months, this could cost Boeing up to $4 billion in extra accounting charges. And this is already a program that has racked up $11 billion of charges. So this is not great news for Kelly Ottberg, who has been brought in to try and get to the bottom of all the range of production, regulatory, financial and operational issues that Boeing has faced. So this is not great, considering he's been presiding now over Boeing over the last year and a bit more so.
Danny, when you look at Tesla, this was also the big story yesterday, looking at exactly how Elon Musk is trying to turn the company around. It beat quarterly sales expectations, but the stock was down significantly.
Yeah. I feel like there is a bit of a divergence between the EV performance, whether Tesla has been delivering record numbers for this particular last quarter. However, it is still against a backdrop of broader weaker sales and a general weaker outlook. And a lot of these sales in that third quarter was brought forward because of the end of this US federal tax credit. And so therefore, when investors look to the end of the year, there's probably not much more in the tank. But then if you're playing the long game, investors are looking towards AI, Optimus, robots and driverless cars that will really fuel Tesla, because it's more than just a car company, as Elon Musk says. This is more about it being this leader in AI and whatnot for the years to come.
Danny, thanks so much. Danny Lee there looking at Tesla and Boeing. Now joining us to talk markets, Seema Shah, Chief Global Strategist at Principal Asset Management. Seema, when you look, thank you for joining us on this Friday, non-jobs day. I mean, how problematic is it actually for traders and markets, but also economists to understand exactly what the economy is looking at?
Hi, thanks for having me on. I think at any time that you're not going to get data, it's going to be a tough time to try and navigate the market dynamics. I think it's probably even worse right now because there's been so much going on. The Federal Reserve, as we know, is already almost struggling with the muddiness of the labour market data, given the various supply dynamics, even trying to consider how AI is coming in and maybe impacting the labour market. So this is unhelpful. It's going to be really important how long this extends for, not in terms of the economic impact, but simply in terms of the data, because we feel like we can get to the October Fed meeting. We think that they are very likely to cut rates even without the near-term data. But of course, as you go beyond that, then they're getting into a very large gap without that kind of data, and then December starts to become, I guess, a more questionable affair.
So what do you think we're seeing in the U.S. economy, especially when it comes to, this fraught relationship between labor and inflation? Is it true that we shouldn't worry about inflation for the moment?
I think that is to some extent. I mean, when we're looking at the broad economy, we're looking at all the various activity indicators. So aside from the labour market, things look OK. I mean, it's slowing. So we're not we're not seeing an acceleration, but certainly we're not talking about recessionary conditions. And then from a labour market perspective, the labour data, we can clearly see that there's a labour market demand slowdown, and probably more so than what the labour supply dynamics are saying. So there is a slowdown in play. But together, what that means is that the inflation dynamics are probably less, I should say the fundamentals are less important in terms of driving up the pressures. So we do think that right now inflation is almost contained, albeit at that 3% level. But this isn't the end of the fight. And I think from the Fed perspective, they're going to have to keep a really close eye. We know that from companies' perspectives, they maybe haven't been passing on price increases yet. But of course, as margin pressures become a little bit more impactful, then next year becomes a slightly different story.
Seema, when you look at, for example, how much does it make more sense to go gradually? I don't know how many Fed cuts you're expecting, or why not go big and then see what happens?
Well, I think the thing is that, look, as we said, the data is murky. You now have the shutdown stopping you from getting the labour market, the non-farm payrolls today. But overall, this is a picture where you have, it's a confusing one. You have an economic broad activity picture, which is fairly robust, but you have a labour market slowdown, you have supply dynamics, as I said, you've got the tech. In that kind of situation where you don't really know where you're going, you shouldn't really run head first at the door. You should be maybe treading along. So from our perspective, 3 cuts at least takes you towards neutral. And then it would make sense for the Fed to stop and almost appraise the situation, see if they have any better understanding of what's going on in the labour market. So we would expect to see a couple more rate cuts after into 2026. Yeah. But in terms of the magnitude, then you also have to consider the politicisation of the Fed and what the makeup is going to be once Fed Chair Powell is out.
Seema, when you look at equities, we've had a really good run for a lot of these indices, but is there still more upside to be had? Because again, there's this complicated economy. The Fed is actually going through a difficult time also existentially, but markets are roaring ahead.
They are, and I think what the market is doing is almost looking away from the data to some extent and just saying, well, look, earnings growth at the moment is pretty good. We're not hearing of any really concerning stories from corporates. Corporate spreads are really tight. And then on top of that, we're now getting Fed cuts, which, it's not against a recessionary backdrop. So you're almost giving a little bit more juice to the market. So we do think that there's more gains to be had. They're probably not going to be very significant. And maybe they may be, at least in the near term, a little bit more focused on the tech side, because that tech capex trade is, aside from any of the macro conditions, a very macro agnostic. So I think that's what's going to continue to carry the market. And then maybe in later 26, you could see a bit more broadening out into some other sectors as well.
So how do you construct your portfolio?
So at the moment, we're very much risk on. We're still very much risk on US equities. We have been building up a position in small caps. Typically, they will do well in a rate cutting environment, domestic conditions being robust, which pretty much fits the way that we're looking at the broader economy. And we think that could be sustained for a little bit longer as well. But we do think there's pockets outside the US as well. So, we do believe in that long-term tech narrative. So if you believe in that, there are pockets specifically across Asia, which should continue to benefit from that theme. So those are the areas. And then within credit, it's still very much risk on, even verging into the high yield, certainly the EMD side. So there is a lot to be had. in this environment, even though valuations are really stretched. You do need to be quite selective.
I mean, are you selective on a regional basis or more like on an industry level?
Well, so I think there's selectivity within the region, but I certainly from our equities team, what they're really focused on is that stock picking, really looking at the bottom up, because at these kind of valuations, it doesn't mean that everything is very expensive. There are going to be opportunities, but you really need to dive pretty deep into the data to try and identify them.
Are there other ways, if you don't have the jobs report and we don't actually know how long the shutdown's for? First, I mean, why is the market not sitting up and listening maybe to how long or the longer term implications of the shutdown? But also, too, is there other ways of tracking the economy, modeling it in ways because of AI that we hadn't thought about a couple of years ago?
Yeah, well, I mean, so to the first question, historically, you don't really see a very sustained impact on the economy from a shutdown. Yeah. And if you're not seeing a sustained impact on the economy, you shouldn't see any really fundamental impact on earnings. So overall, from a market perspective, we're almost looking away. But, you're right in saying that the data is really key at this point. There are other ways, and you can see that the market has been really a little bit more focused on the ADP. There were some other private payroll numbers which came out yesterday. They haven't been great indicators in the past of where the employment numbers are going. So, we want to treat that with a pinch of salt. So, unfortunately, at the moment, it is almost kind of feeling it out in the blind on the assumption that it's only going to last for 2 or 3 weeks.
What do you do with dollar right now?
We do think there's a little bit more weakness to go. And I think there's a couple of reasons. One is that, as we've already seen, there's been concerns about the credibility of US institutions. We think the conversations around the Fed is going to continue through 2026, of course, as Powell's term comes up. So that might chip away a little bit further. But the other thing is interest rate differentials. As the Fed is just starting its rate cutting cycle, you're seeing the ECB almost coming to an end. You're seeing the Bank of Japan maybe nearing towards a rate hike. So you are seeing that kind of desynchronization, and that interest rate differential should put a little bit more weakness, at least downward pressure on the dollar. But we're not talking about a spiral. We're not talking about the loss of reserve currency status. This is more of just a continued erosion of that dollar.
Seema, we also had a good conversation with the MPC member, Catherine Mann, and she was talking about actually her worries about inflation, which is sticky, especially in certain parts of the economy. Is it more difficult for the UK right now than other major economies? Yeah,
it is. And I think the difference is that when we're looking at the ECB, when we're looking at the US, these aren't really structural factors. We're almost thinking about the cyclicals. For the UK, they have deeper structural factors, which I think is contributing to that sticky inflation picture. It can't just be resolved by a slight weakening in the labour market. So the Bank of England is unfortunately faced with this very, very difficult dilemma where you do have weakening growth. You have a labour market which is very likely to weaken. You have very sticky inflation with some forecasts showing a continued upward move over the coming months. And then, of course, you have this fiscal issue. So I think that they are very much probably the most difficult position of the major central banks right now.
And so what does that mean for sterling?
We would say that there's still a little bit more weakness to go, depending on how the Bank of England is really going to proceed. We do expect them to cut a little bit more. Even though they've paused for now, we do think they're going to have to cut rates a little bit further. And if you're looking at the broad strength of the UK, it probably doesn't spell great news for sterling.
Seema, thank you so much for joining us. As always, Seema Shah there, Chief Global Strategist at Principal Asset Management. Coming up, the former Chatham House Chief Executive, Robin Niblett, joins us to discuss geopolitics, the U.S. shutdown, and the latest on the EU's response to Russia. That's next, and this is Bloomberg. Welcome back, everyone. Now, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskiy says his country may receive longer-range weapons from the U.S. to counter Russian airstrikes. The comments came after he met with EU leaders in Copenhagen. Ukraine hopes to strengthen its position in any future ceasefire negotiations by conducting longer-range strikes on Russian military targets.
Meeting with President of the United States, yes, we will maybe have something more. I don't know. We'll see.
Flight operations have resumed at Munich airport after it was shut down temporarily due to several drone sightings. Germany's second-largest airport grounded 17 departing flights last night, affecting around 3,000 passengers, and diverted 15 arrivals to nearby cities. Several airports across Europe have been affected in recent weeks due to unidentified drones. And here in the UK, counter-terrorism police have named a British citizen of Syrian descent as a perpetrator of an attack on a synagogue that killed 2 people. 2 men died and 3 others sustained serious injuries during the assault on the temple in Manchester when worshippers were gathering from Yom Kippur, the holiest day in the Jewish calendar. Police said the attacker drove a vehicle at people outside the synagogue and then attacked them with a knife before being shot dead by officers. Now, for more on all of these stories, we're joined by Robin Niblett, Distinguished Fellow and former Chief Executive at Chatham House. Robin, thank you for joining us. We were just talking about the UK and that horrific act that happened yesterday. Acts in general of terrorism seem to be being more widespread. Is this a very divided society, or should we take a pause, a breath, and actually see exactly what's going on?
Look, I'm not sure if Britain as a whole and the British people are a divided society. I think they're united, and the vast majority would absolutely condemn the horrific attack yesterday. But there's no doubt that tensions between the communities, between the Jewish community and obviously the Islamic community as well, have been deepening very sharply in the last 2 years since the terrorist attacks by Hamas on October 7th, 2 years ago. So, it's interesting. You've got a government that is trying to move in both directions simultaneously. There's a potential protest on Saturday in support of defending our juries, spelt Juries, which is in support of trying to overturn the UK ban on Palestine action, which has been nominated by the British government as a terrorist organization. Many people don't agree with that. But on the other hand, at the same time, the British government has recognized a Palestinian state, despite really getting much of anything in return for it. So I think on both sides of the debate, those who are most invested in this outcome and most invested in the future are feeling really very unhappy with the government. And the society itself is deeply divided. No doubt there have been doubling of attacks against Jewish people in the United Kingdom over the last year. The BBC has some very clear numbers on this. Rises of Islamophobia on the other side. It's a very, very sad time at the moment. But I think at the moment we have to focus. People should not be murdered just because of their religion. It's just utterly appalling.
Yeah, and Robin, as you say, I mean, the incident is really focusing, the attention on Britain's already strained community relations, its approach to combating terrorism and anti-Semitism. What can the Prime Minister and the government do today?
Well, I think the first thing they have to work out is how can they simultaneously increase the security around synagogues and other places of Jewish worship and Jewish community, while at the same time having to police a large protest in London tomorrow on the other side of the agenda. And actually protests in support of Palestine went ahead in Manchester yesterday evening as well. So the police forces are deeply stretched, and it exposes, I think, the rifts at the heart of British society at the moment. So no, the government is torn. It looks like, I mean, this is obviously incredibly early reporting, and I'm not claiming I know this for a fact, but it looks like a relatively, it's one individual, 3 other people have been arrested. It looks like what is described as a kind of self-starter attack. This person was not, apparently, according to news reports, on the prevent watch list. But it just reminds you how deep hate on social media, the kind of language around community relations can then provoke, for some people, this despicable act.
Robin, and this is, of course, something that's being felt in many countries, including the US, including in France, including Germany and others. What's it mean for geopolitical relations?
Look, I don't know. I think in the end, I think this, as I said, is a horrific attack in the United Kingdom. It has its echoes around other parts of Europe. It has its echoes in the United States as well. In the end, I feel it is running in parallel, if I may say so, to the geopolitics of the world. It's ironic that the Middle East is the one part of the world where I'd say both the United States, China, and probably even Russia would like to see progress and don't see it as an area of geopolitical division. So this really is an aspect of domestic politics for the United Kingdom, for the US, for other countries in Europe in particular. And obviously, there's this opportunity potentially out there with the Trump peace plan endorsed by Muslim governments, Arab governments, endorsed by European governments as well, to try to force a ceasefire and actually a plan for the future that is actually quite, you could say, reasonable. It's talking about non-annexation by the Israeli government of Palestinian land. It's talking about no role for Hamas of any sort in future governance of Gaza or of any type of Palestinian entity. Ironically, we have a moment where all of the governments seem to have moved around one particular solution, even the government of Bibi Netanyahu. So I'm hoping that there could be some moment of light in the future. I'm not hugely optimistic, but at least that's a modest step forward.
Robin, talk to me about Ukraine. Has the U.S. effectively given Europe actually more power to deal with Ukraine? And what do you think Russia's playing out with the drones, trying to test the limits of Europe and NATO?
Look, I think it's a reflection of the fact that the United States under the Trump administration is not going to be involved in trying to drive proactively from the front seat a solution to the Russian invasion of Ukraine and the ongoing war there. I think it is interesting, the reports which your clip showed there, Keith Kellogg has noted this as well, that the US government is looking to provide long-range strike capability to the Ukrainian government. That's a big move if this turns out to be true. Tomahawk cruise missiles potentially. This comes at a time when the Ukrainian government, with its own long-range drones, has proved especially successful in the last 2 to 3 weeks in striking not just Russian oil refineries, but also production depots, port terminals. There's been a real drop in domestic access to petrol and refined petroleum products in Russia. There's now a ban on the export of petroleum products to the end of the year. Russia needs those oil exports to pay for the war. So it's a very interesting moment that to see the US government, in a way, from a distance, trying to help the Ukrainians do what they need to do, and then relying on the Europeans to pay for it. So I think the government of Vladimir Putin knows that the ball is being moved over to the Europeans, and they're trying to increase the pressure. They're saying, if you want to get involved in a long-term war with us, we have ways of making life really difficult for you.
But, Robin, do you see actually more economic penalties towards Russia from both the US and the EU?
I'm not sure about the US, because in the end, I think Donald Trump does not believe in sanctions. He's worried that sanctions are reducing the role and the influence of the dollar in the global economy. You can see China trying to build up alternative kind of payment systems and trading arrangements. So in a way, what he's been saying, is, hey, Europe, I'll put sanctions on, like I've done on India, tariffs on India. I'll do tariffs on China for supporting Russia, but you do it too. And the one thing we know is the Europeans are not going to impose tariffs on India, with which they're trying to do a trade deal, or on China, with which they're trying to manage a very complicated relationship of being opposed to Chinese support for Russia on Ukraine, but trying to keep open an economic relationship for exports, for green technology, for renewable energy. So that's not going to happen.
Robin.
The one thing that will happen, if I say very quickly, they are going to sanction them.
Thank you. Robin Niblett there from former Chatham House. This is Bloomberg. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to The Pulse. I'm Francine Lacqua here in London, and these are your top stories. The all-important U.S. jobs print gets hit by the federal government shutdown. President Trump vows thousands of job cuts, ramping up pressure on Democrats to end the impasse. The global stock rally extends into a 6th day as optimism over AI lifts equities. Plus, Bloomberg learns that Boeing's 777X will not start commercial flights until 2027, in yet another delay for the flagship jet. Now, Italy's cabinet has approved a budget with a 3% deficit this year, allowing the Premier, Giorgia Meloni's government, to set aside more money for tax cuts and defense. Well, joining us now is our Italy bureau chief, Chiara Albanese. Chiara, as always, thank you. Many guests have told us that France is the new Italy. How much better in a fiscal position is Italy after this budget?
Well, the news of Italy being able to reach 3% of the deficit already this year is great news. It came last night after a late evening cabinet meeting, and it really shows that Italy is on track to achieve the EU rules and meeting them ahead of expected. Well, this is a sign that definitely France and Germany are not in this position to give, and it really is a testament to Giorgia Meloni's ability to reassure investors, to reassure markets, and to deliver cuts in terms of like the deficit and the debt that has been a plague for Italy for several years.
So, Chiara, to what extent do tariffs remain a risk to the Italian economy directly and via the impact on its trading partner, Germany?
Well, there is little to say. Italy has got a mammoth debt load. But what this government has been able to do in this period of higher rates, and definitely a positive feedback getting that it got from markets, it has been able to start climbing down this path of reassuring further investors, cutting the deficit level, and also having its spread versus German yields going down, and also being narrower than the French one. And this is kind of a vicious circle that has been going around. And definitely, as we were saying, France and its instability have actually gone into a different direction, all kind of helping Italy to attract more capital and to become a sort of like positive legal safe haven into Southern Europe and Central Europe.
Chiara, thanks so much. Our Italy Bureau Chief there, Chiara Albanese. Now, some news actually just crossing the Bloomberg terminal. Huawei is using advanced components from Asia's largest technology firms in at least some of its leading Ascend AI processors. Now, this is a research firm that discovered this during teardowns, highlighting China's reliance on foreign hardware as it works to boost domestic production of AI semiconductors. So this is according to a Bloomberg story just crossing the terminal. We'll have plenty more when we get it. Now, the French Prime Minister, Sébastien Lecornu, is meeting with lawmakers for crunch talks as he struggles to pass the budget. The talks could determine not only the fate of his government, but also how Europe's second largest economy tackles its mounting deficit. Shortly before those discussions started, Lecornu said his government would exclude use of a constitutional measure that allows it to push through laws. Now, for more, we're joined by Alan Katz, our Paris Bureau Chief. Alan, thank you for joining us. So how realistic are Lecornu's chances of striking a deal?
That's a really hard bet to make one way or the other. I mean, I guess it's not great. That said, 49.3, this constitutional measure that you just mentioned that France has used to push through a lot of things, budgets mainly, but also the very unpopular increase in the retirement age back in 2023, his announcement that his government would not use that is nevertheless, it's a real step towards some of the opposition parties who've made that sort of one of their rallying calls to not use that kind of measure anymore. What it does is it allows you to push through a law even when you don't have the votes in Parliament. And in theory, it would make parliamentarians much more powerful. Until now, the real power of Parliament has been like either you work with us or we can oust you in a no confidence motion. This would, in theory, give them a lot more power to actually shape the budget. So we'll have to see with these discussions today if the opposition parties actually, bite on this at all and it progresses a bit, or if they say, actually, you know what, we're not interested, and then it would be much less likely that Lecornu and his government, which is yet to be named, by the way, besides him, would survive, very much longer.
So, Alan, if Lecornu actually fails to secure enough support, what are the immediate risks for France's budget process?
So the immediate risk is that you just don't get a budget. So if this doesn't sort of go anywhere and Lecornu is ousted in the end, whether it's next week or sometime down the road, but then you'll have to sort of start from the beginning on a budget. And the way that the system works in France is that there's certain minimum amounts of time that a budget has to be debated in Parliament. So basically, to have a budget by the end of the year, it has to be submitted to Parliament by October 13th. And if Lecornu forms a government this weekend as expected, and if that government survives, at least initially, then you can start to have that debate. If it doesn't, then that October 13th date will certainly be missed. Now, I want to bear in mind, or want to make clear, since you mentioned the U.S. government shutdown earlier, the French system is a little bit different. So if there is no budget by the end of the year, there probably will, almost certainly will not be a shutdown. The French can pass something called a special law, which would roll over the 2025 budget into 2026, and that would keep all government services continuing to operate. And so it's not quite the same stakes at play as in the United States, but nevertheless, the goal is at least to have a budget by the end of the year.
Alan, thank you so much. Bloomberg Paris Bureau Chief Alan Katz. Now, a huge fire has erupted after an explosion at a Chevron oil refinery near Los Angeles, producing towering flames and plumes of smoke, which could be seen for miles. Chevron have accounted for all personnel, confirming there were no injuries at its El Segundo facility. It's not yet clear what caused the blaze. Now, the chairman of BBVA and the chief executive of Sabadell are seeking to sway investors their way during the final days of a takeover battle that has lasted 17 months. Now, the potential deal is an all-cash transaction that offers one BBVA share for just over 4.8 shares of Sabadell, marking a 10% increase from the original offer. Now, Sabadell's board has declined the offer. It's now in the hands of shareholders. I think we can cross over now to Turin, where, of course, our Tom McKenzie is speaking to David Solomon, the interview of the day. Here it is.
Given the geopolitical strains, given now as well the shutdown in the US. David, does the US economy weather the current political standoff in Washington? And does that resilience that we've seen this year continue into 2026?
Well, first, thank you for having me here. Delighted to be here. The U.S. economy is in pretty good shape, and there are some very, very strong tailwinds that have really had a profound effect, and there are also some things going on that are creating headwinds and are probably leading the economy to, underperform its expectation at this time, but I'm optimistic that we're probably going to see an acceleration as we continue to head into 2026. The big structural issue that's kept the U.S. economy going so well is the U.S., and by the way, other developed economies around the world, are running very aggressive fiscal stimulus plays. Governments are spending enormously into economies in the developed world, and that keeps the economy going even when you have other headwinds. Second big macro phenomenon that's affecting the U.S. economy is all of the AI infrastructure build, all the capital spending, all that's going into the ground to support the deployment, the development, the continued growth of AI infrastructure into the enterprise, and that's a big tailwind too. That's balanced on the other side by the implementation of the trade policies, which are still getting absorbed. I think we're seeing, some of the effects from trade, but there's still more to go in terms of really understanding how the trade policy is fully implemented and how it balances growth. And then obviously the world's a little bit more geopolitically fragile, and that has an impact on growth and kind of confidence. But when you balance it all, and you saw the third quarter reading was quite strong, but year over year, from last December to this December, the overall growth trajectory will probably be a little bit less than 2%. And so that's slightly below trend, but still in pretty good shape.
And an acceleration into 2026?
I think that as the trade policies are absorbed and you have the continued stimulus and the continued kind of tech spend, you've got a pretty good tailwind. I hear as I talk to CEOs that would kind of have their finger on the pulse. Certainly the upper end of the economy is still spending quite strongly, a little bit more constraint on the downside, on the lower part of the economy. But I think the things you have to watch labor. There's no question labor is a little bit softer, and the Fed's watching labor carefully. And, I think you've also got to watch inflation and whether or not the impact of trade is just a one-time price movement or there's something, more significant that comes through, and it's too early to know.
And you touched on labor. How would you characterize the health of the U.S. job market right now?
It's a little bit softer. And I think you can step back and you can understand why. When you think about big enterprises and what's going on with technology, people are pausing hiring to really kind of evaluate how, as they bring this technology into the enterprise, they can automate, create efficiencies, reinvest. And so, I think at the moment that's slowed hiring, and as a result, the labor numbers are a little bit softer.
The Federal Reserve cut interest rates for the first time this year in September, last month. The markets are expecting another approximately 4 cuts between now and this time next year, another 1 percentage point of cuts, with inflation remaining above the target for the Fed. Does that seem reasonable to you?
I think it's in the distribution of outcomes. I think we'll have to watch. I know there's a great parlor game of people kind of predicting what the world's going to look like 6 months, 12 months out. If you think about what the world looked like in April and where markets were in April and think about where they are today, I'd just be cautious. I think that I think that we've got competing forces between labor and inflation, and how they balance, which is still a little bit uncertain, will have an impact on whether we get one more cut or we get 2 or 3 more cuts.
Global stocks at record highs. US stocks at record highs. The S&P 500 is up about 15% year to date. Nvidia's market cap is around $4.5 trillion. That's more than the entire market caps of France, UK, Germany, Italy combined. Does the market rally? Does this bull market, are you comfortable with this bull market given some of the concerns you flagged?
Am I comfortable? Yeah, I sleep very well. I'm not, I'm not going to bed every night worried about what will happen next. But markets run in cycles, and whenever we've historically had a significant acceleration in a new technology that creates a lot of capital formation and therefore lots of interesting new companies around it, you generally see the market run ahead of the potential because there are going to be winners and losers. They're going to be winners and losers. If you go back and you think about the internet, pick on Amazon. Amazon was one of many companies that was prosecuting that kind of opportunity. Many of the companies went away. Amazon became an incredible company. You're going to see a similar phenomenon here. I wouldn't be surprised if in the next 12 to 24 months we see a drawdown with respect to equity markets. But that shouldn't be surprising given the run we've had. But generally speaking, I think what's super exciting is the technology is expanding, new companies are being formed, and the potential of this technology deployed into the enterprise can be very, very powerful. And so it's an exciting time in the market. The market looks forward.
What does that mean for deal making? You've seen a pickup in deal making. What is the scale of the pickup that you expect to see, and what are you seeing in Europe?
The pickup in deal making broadly is meaningful, but it's particularly accelerated in the US. And what's driving the pickup in deal making is a changed regulatory environment. So if you were thinking strategically and you wanted to really expand your scale or your competitive position in almost any industry, for the last 4 years in the United States, the answer was no from a regulatory perspective. It really wasn't what's the question, what could the answer be? The answer was no. And I think CEOs at this point imagine they're in an environment where you actually can get strategic transactions done to expand your competitive position. And so we obviously inside Goldman Sachs, we have an early look at that activity in those dialogues. And I would say it's accelerated very significantly. If you just look at the facts in terms of what's public, we've obviously had a very significant M&A quarter. We had a $1 trillion M&A volume quarter this past quarter. And if you look at large cap M&A, meaning M&A for companies that are $10 billion or larger, it's up 100% year over year. So there is real momentum in the deal-making environment. I think you're going to see an acceleration of that into 26 for sure. And increasingly, CEOs are testing what the bounds are of their ability to enhance their competitive position or improve their scale and their lead, where they have a leading position in a variety of industries. Okay. And I think the regulatory environment is going to permit that at the moment.
Okay, so it sounds like you're going to be very busy, you and the team, on deal making in 2026. What are your priorities, David, for Goldman and the franchise next year?
Well, we don't really think about it, next year. Our priorities always start with the way we face and serve our clients. But in 2019, 2020, we laid a strategic plan out for the firm, and we've been executing against it for the last 6 or 7 years. And as you highlighted earlier in the discussion, we've created a lot of value because we've grown the firm. At the end of the day, as a public company, we have to grow. We might be a big, mature public company, but we have to grow. We have to grow. We have to grow our earnings. And to do that, you have to have a cogent plan where you're investing in different parts of the business. We have 2 big principal businesses, our investment banking and trading business, where I think there's little debate about our leadership position. It's an extraordinary business, very big business. We've been investing and adding more resources to that business over the last 5-6 years. We've increased our market shares very meaningfully in that business. Our market shares are up about 350 basis points over the last 5 years in that business. And then separately, we have the 5th or 6th, 7th, depending on how you look at it, largest active asset manager in the world. We manage about $3.4 trillion through our asset and wealth management platform. That business is growing high single digits is what we've put out publicly. It's actually been growing faster than that. And we continue to invest in a variety of aspects of that business where we see real growth. We can grow our wealth business, which is an ultra high net worth wealth business. We can continue to grow our alternatives platforms, private capital formation. And we have a very flexible solutions business where really for big institutional capital allocators, we have an ability to really create and customize what they need from an investment perspective.
There's been a lot of discussion here at Italian Tech Week about how to get globally significant generational businesses, tech businesses, built out of Europe, $100 billion plus. What is your prescription for that?
I mean, my prescription for that is savings in Europe and capital in Europe needs to come into the risk economy in Europe. You just don't have the scale and scope of the available savings here getting deployed into the tech risk ecosystem at the pace that it should when you compare and you look to the way things are deployed in the United States. And in fact, one of the things that happens here is capital from here looks over there. And so there are enormously smart, talented people here, lots of great ideas, capital formation, and a real focus on risk-taking. Stuff's going to go right, stuff's going to go wrong, but you got to take risk, you've got to deploy capital. This really has to become a bigger center of capital deployment. And also, the more we can get the European Union to be operating as an economic union and taking advantage of the 400 plus million people that are here, as opposed to the individual states, for lack of a better term, the more we can get the tech economy working that way, I think the better chance we have of reaching your goal, which I think would be a very noble goal for the world. So I mean, the more innovation over here, the better for the world.
Yeah. So Ursula von der Leyen will be here. So your one message to the European Commission president would be centralizing or capital markets?
Well, certainly.
Are you seeing the urgency?
I'm feeling more urgency when I'm over here, but still, the regulatory process in Europe is slow. Capital markets union for sure. More encouragement of risk-taking in capital markets, trying to bring it all together, consolidation in the banking system instead of national champions in every market, consolidation in the exchange system instead of champions in every market. Those are all things that will make capital formation easier, risk capital formation better, and will allow the acceleration of great companies here in these markets.
You have lent into tech and into AI. Your team were telling me you have 12,000 engineers across Goldman Sachs. You have an AI, the Goldman Sachs AI assistant. You have an AI developer. What parts of the business, and you've talked about some of them, whether it's wealth or asset management or trading or the consumer, what parts of the business at Goldman are going to be most transformed by AI?
Well, I think, the business of work is getting transformed by AI broadly. And, we are, at our heart, we're a professional services firm. If you think about Goldman Sachs and the value it brings to its clients, its value is deployed really among three different things: people, capital, technology. And so if you think about AI, AI really allows smart, talented, driven, sophisticated people to be more productive, to touch more people, to have better information at their disposal, better analysis. I mean, this is a journey we've been on. This technology accelerates it, but when I started 42 years ago and I wanted to look at 5 different companies and think about how to compare the trading in 5 different companies, I had to go to the library, I had to go to the microfiche, I had to spend hours really thinking about how to put that comparison together. Obviously today, you can do it in a fraction of a second speaking into your phone. So this journey in providing tools to super productive people and giving them more capacity to serve their clients and to be more productive is obvious, and we've been working on all those tools as most enterprises have. I think the more interesting thing for enterprises broadly, and this isn't unique to Goldman Sachs, because the world is underpinned by technology. Coding is time-consuming, but this technology allows you to code with greater productivity and efficiency. So one great coder now, with a tool such as Cognition Labs Devon, for example, really creates massive coding capacity for one coder, as opposed to having 10, 20 people sit around for a few days. So big productivity there. And then, of course, when you think about operational systems in any business, the ability to accelerate automation and therefore drive more productivity, it's not just a cost exercise. It's actually about taking that productivity and having more capacity to reinvest in growth in your business. We'll spend $6 billion on technology this year. I would have liked to spend $8 billion. But I can't afford it because I've got to deliver returns.
Yeah.
But with this technology, my ability to spend more and invest more in growth and accelerate things that can grow our enterprise it's more available to us.
5-10 years time, fewer jobs in banking as a result of AI?
I don't think that's the right lens. I think there are places where the number of jobs, the actual jobs, will come down. But the lens I look at it is, I think we can continue to grow Goldman Sachs. I think we can continue to serve a wider slice of clients with these tools and these capabilities being integrated into the firm, changing our processes. The question, the way I would answer the question, if the firm was the same size and it didn't grow, we would certainly be operating with fewer people. But if the firm grows and you expand and you can invest in other areas for growth, we'll wind up with more jobs 10 years from now than we have today. Just as, by the way, we have in every step along the journey for the last 40 years, as technology has made us more productive. I don't think it's different this time.
So just be clear, you foresee more headcount in 5-10 years' time?
That's because I think we're going to be running a much bigger enterprise.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do you worry about there's been some hand-wringing in terms of the investment? We've seen the hyperscalers, $350 billion in terms of capex and data centers and infrastructure, and the concern that the return on investment isn't being matched. That's not matching the revenue on the other side. Does that concern you, that mismatch?
Well, sure. It concerns anybody that's deploying capital, but I think the journey's pretty clear, even though we're at the beginning of the movie, not the end of the movie. I guarantee you at the end of the movie, there'll be a bunch of winners and there'll be a bunch of losers. There'll be a bunch of capital that was deployed that ultimately delivered very attractive returns, and there'll be a lot of capital that was deployed that did not deliver returns. And you can go back in any super tech cycle or any big investment cycle, and that is the pattern you'll see. It's not different this time. We just don't know how that will play out. But it's very exciting to see these technologies get deployed and the impact it's going to have. It allows productive people and productive businesses to be even more productive. And so people get very caught in this question of more or less. And, I prefer a lens that says there are obviously things where we're going to have a lot fewer people. But I'd love to have the capacity to go get more people to spend time with clients. I'd love to have the capacity to invest in new businesses where I think we can affect clients, and we need people to do those things. So it's a give and take, and nobody stands still.
To be clear, you're not worried about an AI bubble?
An AI bubble. I think that there will be a lot of capital that's deployed that will turn out to not deliver returns. And when that happens, people won't feel good. I'm not going to use the word bubble because I don't know what the path will be, but I do know people are out on the risk curve because they're excited. And when they're excited, they tend to think about the good things that can go right, and they diminish the things you should be skeptical about that can go wrong. We're in one of those environments where people are out on the risk curve, and there'll be a reset. There'll be a check at some point. There'll be a drawdown. The extent of that will depend on how long this goes. By the way, if we were having this conversation in 1988, you would have been asking the same. 1998, you would have been asking the same question. Yet the environment went on for another 3 years until there was then a significant check in 2001 and 2002. So I'm not smart enough to know. I think it's going to go on for a while. I think the opportunities are great. I think they're very exciting. But I also see complacency around risk-taking. And when that happens, ultimately, there'll be some speed bumps or some drawdowns.
David Solomon, Chairman and CEO of Goldman Sachs. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Fantastic.
Appreciate it.
Thank you, David.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
What a wonderful conversation. Also with, I have to say, a spitting set, not something that you see every day. Tom McKenzie there speaking with the Goldman Sachs Chief Executive David Solomon at Time Tech Week. They talked about the Fed, they talked about tech, and some of course, the things that we should be watching out for. It's Friday, but we don't have jobs today. This is because of the U.S. government shutdown. Still great to look at the markets as always. A lot of the focus is, of course, on tech and the tech rally that we saw over the last couple of days. Now, the stocks rally seems to be hand in hand with what's going on with AI. This tech-fueled rally in global stocks continued as big-ticket artificial intelligence partnerships seem to be stoking more and more fresh optimism. It's also very clear that if you look at the directional pull of markets, investors wagering that billions pouring into the AI sector will translate into profits and extend gains in tech shares. I'm looking at the S&P futures are gaining some 0.2%. If you look at a gauge for Asian technology stocks, for example, they definitely led the charge with a new record as Hitachi teaming up with OpenAI on energy and related infrastructure, while Fujitsu, for example, expanded its collaboration with NVIDIA. Euro dollar 117.44, and then gold. I love looking at gold because it's usually very symptomatic of what exactly is going on. 3,864. Remember, it's headed for a 7th weekly advance. Oil also on track for its biggest weekly decline since late June. Let's also look at what's happening in Europe and quickly maybe U.S. futures. Europe is really following the direction of what happened in Asia and probably then what's happening in the U.S. later today. And then if you look at what we heard from the Treasury Secretary, Scott Bessent, he predicted a pretty big breakthrough in the next round of trade talks with China. So that's also something that we really need to keep an eye on. S&P futures, NASDAQ, the big ones to watch out for, getting some 0.3%. Up next, it's a Bloomberg Brief with Vonnie Quinn. This is Bloomberg.